All right, let's get started here. We're on chapter 5 of Daniel. Chapter 5 of Daniel. This is quite a bit in the future. We don't really know when Nebuchadnezzar went mad. We don't really have any historical references for that. So we know that he died in 562 BC. So if the events of Daniel 4 occurred during the last year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, then Daniel 5 begins like 23 years later, okay, in 539 BC. However, if Nebuchadnezzar's insanity ended about 570 BC, then about 30 years have passed between the events of Daniel 4 and Daniel 5. See, the thing with Daniel 5 is we can pinpoint exactly when this is, because we know exactly when the Persians and the Medes invade Babylon and take over the kingdom. So, what has happened in those, what has happened in those 30-odd years, roughly? Well, a lot has happened since Nebuchadnezzar's death. He was succeeded by his son, Amel-Marduk, but who reigned for only 2 years, and then was assassinated. Okay, so, which is not cool, right? And his brother-in-law, Nergal-Shar-Ussur, was one of the conspirators of the plot. So, of course, you know what the difference between in-laws and outlaws is?
One's wanted, one's not.
Yep, outlaws are wanted. So it doesn't help when you're an in-law and an outlaw, right? He ruled for 4 years, and then he died, and he was succeeded by his young son, Labashi-Marduk, who ruled for only a few months. He was deposed in a rebellion, and then it brought Nabonidus to the throne. And Nabonidus reigned from 556 BC until the fall of Babylon to the Persians. Now, if you look at the first line of chapter 5, who does it say is king? Belshazzar. So, is the Bible wrong? No, it's not. Easy answer. So, how does this work? How can Belshazzar be king when we know from history that Nabonidus is king? Well, Nabonidus was very, very unpopular. He was unpopular because of his religion. He was very religious to the moon god Sin, rather than to Marduk or the god Bel. And because of this unpopularity, he installed his son, Belshazzar, as co-regent, and voluntarily exiled himself to Tema in the Arabian desert for some 10 years. This is very important, because later on we'll see why Belshazzar says some of the things that he says. Okay? So, now, what is happening? What is happening during this time? Well, we know we know when exactly this took place. Okay, that Belshazzar is killed. It's like October. Yeah, he is killed October. I can't find it now, but he's killed in October of 539. Okay, because we know the exact date when the Persians and the Medes take over. Okay, so we know exactly when he dies. Okay. So, the Persians marched into Babylon on October 12th, 539. Therefore, the banquet, that is the historical setting of Daniel 5, must be the evening of October 11th, 539. So you exactly know when this exactly took place. Okay? We know this from the historical record. Now the interesting thing with Belshazzar is that up until the 1860s, there had been no knowledge of him in outside records. The only record of him was in the Bible. And so people thought and argued up until the 1860s that, well, obviously Daniel chapter 5 is fake, right? It's fake news, right? That it's not real. It's a fictional king, and it's, just some story to, push a Judean cause. But in the 1860s, new Babylonian sources came to light that proved that Belshazzar was the son of Nabonidus, and that he was also co-regent over Babylon. So here we see that the scriptures actually are validated by history because they are history, right? Even though we might not be able to always prove it at our time, right? Think of the thousands of years where they couldn't prove this. Eventually the scriptures do vindicate themselves, not only because of their own words, but also because of history. So, all right. So we have that sort of stuff going on here. Now we should probably get into the text. All right, let's read verses 1 through 2. No, 1 through 4. 1 through 4.
King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
All right, so here we see that Belshazzar looks a lot like
Nebuchadnezzar.
Yep, looks a lot like Nebuchadnezzar in a lot of ways, right? He might not be Nebuchadnezzar's son, right? And we can get into that a little later, a blood relative, but he is certainly Nebuchadnezzar's spiritual son. But while Nebuchadnezzar repented of his sin, Belshazzar will not, and God's swift judgment will very soon fall upon him. So, now, what do we know from history? What is Belshazzar doing? What is he doing? This is a very easy question. Don't think too hard about it. What is he doing?
Worshipping false gods.
He's worshiping false gods, but even,
Taking command of the... Is he mocking the true God?
yeah, I mean, because he's worshiping false gods, right? But he is, what does it sound like he's doing?
Boasting of the spoils they've taken.
See, you guys are thinking way too hard.
He's
He's having a
drinking
party.
a lot of wine.
Right. He's having a party, right? See, it's just, see, you guys are too theological, right? Right? He is having a party. Now, what is stupid about this? Well, an army is coming. The Medes and the Persians. His dad just got defeated, right? Do you throw a party when your city is about to be overthrown?
Maybe he thought he could quick have a party.
Right? I mean, it's...
One more.
Yeah, one more. Yeah.
Right. Either that or it's like last call, right?
Yeah.
It's the old saying, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die.
Right. I mean, it shows that Belshazzar is an inferior king to Nebuchadnezzar. Why? Because he should be concerned about the defense of his city. He should be concerned about the safety and security of his nation. And yet, what is he doing? Rather than mounting defenses and getting stuff ready, He's having a party, right? He cares only about himself. And what's worse then is he starts blaspheming, right? He takes the cups, the vessels, the gold and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple, and he's drinking from them, and all of his cohorts are... I mean, think about this. What would this be comparable to today?
Taking the chalice from the altar,
Yeah, and
passing it around.
yeah, and doing like, shots, right? Or throwing a rave in the church building, right? This is along the same lines as that, right? And so, not only is Belshazzar stupid, but he deliberately hasn't learned from his predecessors' mistakes, right? So, this is going to not be cool for him, okay? All right, verses 5 through 6.
Immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand, and the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way and his knees knocked together.
Okay, so as they're doing this blasphemy, God sends a terrible portent to them. This giant hand appears and starts writing on the wall, right? Which is where we get the common expression, writing on the wall, right? And it says here that his countenance was changed, right? And in fact, it goes even further here, and it says, the king's cheerful appearance changed, his thoughts alarmed him, his hip joints were loosed, and his knees knocked together, right? That when it says that his knees, his joints were loosed, they were loosed or untied. It's usually understood as a reference to the hips, which is the logical inference because of the following reference to the king's knees. So the loins may represent human strength, which here fails. Okay? Some have suggested that this is a reference to incontinence caused by extreme fear. Okay? But this will be very important later on because of the play on words, which will happen a little later. So here, this giant hand appears and starts writing on the wall, and of course, that's going to freak... Yeah, I mean, that's going to freak everybody out, right? That doesn't just happen. Hands don't usually appear and start writing on the wall, right? All right, so who's he going to call? Ghostbusters. No, but the closest thing, right? His astrologers and the Magi. So 7 through 8.
The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof, shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof.
Okay, so this makes this a lot more clear. What does Belshazzar promise? If they're able to interpret this, what are they going to get?
They're going to be a ruler of
And which number?
the third ruler.
So why is that important? Nope, not the...
Oh, not that.
Yeah, think of the history. Why can he only make him third ruler?
Because his father's the main ruler.
Yep.
And he
Is,
the second. And so that
right?
it
So
would
he can
follow
only
him.
give number,
3.
right? You can't give what you don't, right? And so that's the thing to remember. Why can he only give him the third? Well, because he's the number 2 guy, right? His dad is the one who's the true ruler. Nabonidus, right? So, I mean, this should make a lot more sense now with the historical context because it seems strange, right? As a king, why would you make somebody third in the kingdom and not second? Like with Joseph, right? Well, because he can't, right? So, he promises quite a bit, but lo and behold, these guys can't actually interpret it. Now, this is interesting. Why can't they interpret this? Well, because, I mean, really, when Daniel reads this, this is all Aramaic, right? This isn't like a crazy language. Mene, tekel, parson is Aramaic. And they all speak Aramaic. So why aren't they able to interpret it? Well, there's a reason for this. Ancient Aramaic wasn't written with vowels, and there were no spaces between the words. So really, it could have been interpreted in a lot of different ways. It could have been interpreted as, who caused Persia to stumble? Or what shall I weigh? Half a mina. Or whoever you are, Persia is insignificant. That's what you can get from all of these different letters because there are no vowels and there are no spaces, so you don't know where the words actually end. Okay? And so there are so many possibilities that actually you could have had a parlor game trying to come up with as many different interpretation of these letters as you could. So the thing is that they see the letters, but they can't understand them because there are no spaces and there are no vowels. Which is why what Daniel does is ingenious, right? Because more than likely Mene was only written once. But he's actually giving them the key to the interpretation of these letters when he says Mene, tekel, parson. Right? He's actually giving them the lexicographical key to breaking down this long string of letters. Okay? I mean, this is really, I don't know, being a student of language, I mean, it's fascinating, right? And just the words on, the play on words with this is going to be fantastic. So, which we'll get to in just a little bit. But are you understanding what I'm saying here? Am I actually being clear, or is this?
Well, so in the ancient Aramaic, if you didn't have the whole picture or something of context, it's pretty hard to understand just,
Right.
is that what you're saying?
Yes. So, like, for example, it would have been just a string of letters like this, okay? Which could be broken down this way, or that way, or that way. So, like, for example, if you just had the two vowels, CT, what kind of,
We have the two consonants.
or the two
We
consonants?
could make all kinds of words.
Yeah,
out.
it could be cut, it could be cat, it could be, right?
Cut.
So, yeah, cot. You could go through, and that's just that's just two, right? You're talking about 3 consonant words with no spaces and no vowels, right? Which makes sense why they wouldn't have been able to, I mean, there's no context, right? And the other thing is that Mene, tekel, a parson are actually different weights or ways of dealing with money, okay? So, for example, you could say that really these words, which we have done, is mina, shekel, and half mina, okay? They're different weights, and that'll be really important later on with the play on words, okay? Because Hebrews love to do this, and it's just not anything you can get in the English. But since each language has its own.
So does it mean that these guys weren't as educated, that they didn't know
No, I think it has to do with the Spirit of God. The thing is had the different weights been in the correct order, they might have been able to figure it out. But they're not, because it goes from mina to shekel to half mina. So why? You know, usually when you're doing, figuring out riddles, you look for some sort of logic, some sort of, but if you
Something
don't
to
have,
start.
right, if you don't have the context, it's very hard to, you
Even know
know,
where to start.
right. So, I know maybe some of you don't think this, but I find this fascinating.
Sounds like the military and all their acronyms.
Right?
Every time I talk to Kyle, I'm doing that, whatever.
Huh.
Everything's an acronym.
Yeah.
Or look at how many times in wars or whatever they were.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
You gotta try
You know?
to figure out what
Yeah.
each letter means.
Because there's that one.
so they don't go from heaviest to lightest, okay? Which would have made sense
Oh, okay, so now
in the
back
terms of
So the
weight.
code
Back
is
up and
weights.
explain heaviest and lightest.
So, for example, the mina, the shekel, and the half mina are a series of weights in the Old Testament. Okay? So, a mina, a Babylonian mina, was the equivalent of 60 shekels. Okay? And so if you have the mina, and then you have the shekel, and then the half mina, it's not going in order, right? Like we would go ton, half ton, pound, right? But here it's out of order. And that'll be important later on. I know, kind of getting ahead of myself. This is probably not as clear, probably as much gobbledygook as what you know. But yeah, I mean, this will be very important later on. So actually these words are weights. They're different weights that we would, and they will also be plays on words too. So it's really a complex, beautiful statement on the wall once you figure it all out. So, all right. So nobody can figure this out. Back to verse 10. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet hall, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. So, here this queen is not his wife, but more than likely the queen mother, the dowager, okay? And she comes in unannounced, which is a pretty big no-no, right? But because the situation is so dire, she actually breaks protocol. And she tells him about a man in whom the spirit of the holy gods is, which sounds a lot like Daniel, right? Because it is Daniel. Now, she refers to Nebuchadnezzar as Belshazzar's father. This, the use of father here is not a literalistic blood biological relation, right? What is Jesus called? And? He said Son of God. Jesus is called the blank of David. Son of David. Well, how long ago did David live? 930 years before Christ was born. So, there we see that father means ancestor. What does Elisha call Elijah? Calls him father, right? Is Elijah's natural... No. And in fact, not even his ancestor, but his teacher, right? Father in the ancient world has many more... it's not as one-to-one as what we have way more words for grandfather, great-grandfather, etc., right? We don't use the word father often to talk about those who are our teachers, right? But they did. And in fact, it could also be used as a successor, that Belshazzar is a successor to Nebuchadnezzar, okay? So where is Daniel? Why do you think they need to call him?
Because they know he's interpreted dreams before.
Yeah, but where is he?
He's probably,
Still in prison.
Well, no, he's not in prison, right?
but he was given, wasn't he given a place to rule over? No.
Yeah, I mean, he was in the king's courts, so where is he now?
Prisoner?
Not a prisoner, but what happens when you have a change of administration? Yeah, you get kicked out,
He's in
right?
exile. He's in
Right?
exile.
Exile, or it could be that he, because he's probably in his early 80s, maybe mid 80s, right? Especially if he left Israel in 605 BC, right? And now we're talking about 539 BC, right? You're talking quite a number of years, right? You also have the fact that there have been 3 to 4 administrations that ended with assassinations. So, really, I mean, he's blessed that he actually kept his head, literally, not just figuratively, right? So yeah, he's out of power, right? But yet, who remembers him? The queen, right? She remembers him. Forasmuch as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar, now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Then Daniel was brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing, and make known unto me the interpretation thereof, but they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts, and if thou canst read the writing, and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another, yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. So what does Daniel do?
He doesn't want any of that stuff.
Right. Well, and why wouldn't you want any of that stuff?
He's already gone through it once, that he's been a ruler and then,
Yeah, well, what else is coming?
The end of the king.
Do you really want to be in charge when...
No.
Do you really want to be made, the captain when the Titanic is going down? Right? So, yet he will read this because this is also God's judgment, right? O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty and glory and honor. For the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he slew, and whom he would he kept alive, and whom he would he set up, and whom he would he put down. Right? Talking about the great power and authority that God had given to Nebuchadnezzar. But when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. He was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. And thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this. Right? So all these things were laid down as a warning for Belshazzar. Right? He knew this, and yet he rejected it. But hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords and thy wives and thy concubines have drunk wine in them. Thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold and brass and iron and wood and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know. And the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. Right? So, he's worshipped gods of wood and gold and silver and stone, which don't see, they don't hear, they can't help, they don't think. And yet the God in who his souls is in his hand, and who knows all of his ways, that God he is not glorified, though he knew all of these things. Right? This is why those who know will be held to a higher account. Right? This is what Jesus says about Tyre and Sidon and Capernaum. Right? Capernaum, and where most of his mighty works were done. He says, and thou, Capernaum, wilt thou be brought up to heaven? No, thou shalt be brought down to hell. For if the works that had been done in thee had been done in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. Therefore the sons of Sodom will rise up on that day and condemn this generation. Right? That Nebuchadnezzar, all of these things happened to Nebuchadnezzar not only for his own sake, but also for the sake of his progeny and for the kingdom. And yet these warnings were deliberately ignored. So, now it's going to come to an end. Right? God is long-suffering and merciful. And he gave Babylon 70 years. Right? But now it is coming to an end. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this writing that was written, mene, tekel, upharsin. Okay. And these are the Hebrew words, which means mina, shekel, and half mina. And it's amazing the different plays on words here. So, for mene or mina, God has counted mene, your kingdom, and paid it out. Right? That is the literal interpretation of this. God hath numbered thy kingdom and paid it out, right? Because a mina is also a form of money, right? God is repossessing the kingdom, right? He's taking back what he has given. And mina, mene, sounds a lot like mene. This is what happens a lot in the Bible. So, for example, some of the prophets, they'll see like a basket of fruit, and then God will say, judgment. Well, in English, you're like, why does a basket of fruit mean judgment? Well, in Hebrew, the two words are very, very similar. Okay? And so there are a lot of plays on words in Hebrew that you don't get in the translation because it wouldn't make a lot of sense, right? So, mene, mene goes from, it sounds a lot, or it'd be mene, or mene, to mena, right? God has counted, right? Mena is the word for counted. God has counted, or God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. The second word for shekel, tekel, right? You have been weighed, tekilta. You have been weighed in the scales, and you have been found wanting, right? And so the tekel is a play on words for weighed, because shekels were measurements of weighing, right? And this is why you have to have balanced scales, right? And that's why God makes a big deal about that in the scriptures. Well, they've been weighed, but not on a scale of grain, but on the scale of faith, the scale of righteousness, and they have been found wanting, lacking. Okay? The second, a parson, or parson, means the half mina. And this is actually two plays on words. Your kingdom has been broken in two or divided. Perisat, right? and given to the Medes and the Persians. Paras. Right? And so here, with mene, mene, tekel, parson, you see many plays on words and on money within this whole prophecy. Right? That the kingdom has been paid out, or weighed, or divided, smashed in two. And then the similarities between the words. That makes sense? I know, I find it really interesting, so you guys aren't saying anything, so yeah. But yeah, I mean, it really, unless you know the plays on words and the language, you can still understand this, but it lacks a lot of the force of the meaning. And it loses a lot of its beauty. It's like watching something on a really small black and white TV when you could be watching it in digital with surround sound, right? You can still get the job done, but it's not nearly
So
as
then now
nice.
go back and paraphrase, the mene, days are numbered, that God's taking back what he had given them.
Right. God has counted your kingdom, right? Or numbered thy kingdom, which is clearly a play on the spelling of the noun for the weight, the mina, right? Since a mina was used for money, right? God has counted or numbered your kingdom, and now he's taking it back. Okay? Repossessing it. Tekel comes from the word shekel, right? Which was a weight that you would use to measure anything you wanted, grain or other money, that sort of stuff. And so you've been weighed in the scales, and you've been found lacking or too light, right? You're not what you're supposed to be, right? Which is the cause of why God has numbered your kingdom and is now repossessing it. Why? Because you've been in the balance and you're too light. You're not righteous. You're not holy. You're too puffed up with pride. The final one has to do with the ultimate judgment of God, and the half mina, the peres, it sounds really close to has been broken in two or divided, peresat, right, which is eventually going to happen to the kingdom, and then also to the spelling of the Persians, the ones who are ultimately going to rule the kingdom, which is Darius, Xerxes, who are finally conquered by Alexander the Great. Okay? So, there are multiple plays on words here. It's really just masterful and beautiful. And I know I'm probably not explaining it to the degree that it should be explained. But a lot of the words that are translated into English, I don't know how you would even do it. I mean, to get it where it's close enough to the play on words that, yeah. With the money, with the money sense, because you've got not only the weights and the money going on, but you also have, with that sort of language in there, but you also have all these plays on words between the Persians and that sort of stuff. So, and the reason why God has two, a double explicit play on words, and the second one is that this is going to happen. There's nothing that can be done to avert this. Okay? So the judgment is already set. And there's nothing that can be done to stop this. So, then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and put a chain of gold about his neck, made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. This is Darius the Mede. We would also say is Cyrus. And so really, I mean, this is a chapter of great judgment, right? the punishment of against those who break the first commandment. But the gospel comes at the end, right? Well, and there's gospel too, right? In the fact, there is that God is going to restore His people, right? That He is in charge and He does what is right for His own.
And isn't there
Right.
also a separation, the good and the bad, the scales and the balances? How you
Right.
treat your life?
So yeah, there is, and there's great gospel in that the enemies of God will eventually be cast down, right? Judgment on His enemies is gospel for us who are His people. And there's also gospel in the fact of who takes over. Because if Darius the Mede is identified with Cyrus, what does Cyrus do?
Let them return to Israel.
Yeah, and not only that, but he also helps them to rebuild the temple. Right? So that way true worship can once again be instituted among the nations. Right? And so that's the thing. God puts down the proud, and then He exalts a man like Cyrus, or Darius the Mede, who is actually going to do what is good and right for God's church, even though he himself may not be a believer. Right?
Who are the Medes?
Well, I'm having a blank now. So we'll talk about it next time, since we'll be in Daniel 7 with Darius, and we can talk a little bit about why he should be associated with Cyrus, and because the Medes and the Persians were a dual kingdom. We know the Persians better than we know the Medes. Like for example, 300 and Xerxes. Yeah, I mean, that's actually, and the Jews would have looked at him and been like, yeah, that guy's all right. Yeah, he's a pagan, but, he's done right by us. Where the Greeks are like, yeah, this guy is a barbarian tyrant who tries to take over. So
even though Daniel didn't want all those
Yeah.
gifts, he got them anyhow.
right. Well, when a king promises you something, so he probably didn't want to fulfill it. Either that or he did because he thought that it could be avoided. But, well, any questions? I know that was kind of fast going through that, right? But yeah, it's good to know that, all of this stuff is historically verifiable, right? We have records, we know when, and we actually know, we can actually pinpoint the date on this. We know that this happened October 11th, 539 BC. Which is really kind of a cool thing to know, that this isn't just a fairy tale or a parable, but this is, this actually happened. And it happened for the good of God's people, right? And that's the thing. The reason why our Lord recorded this for us is not just simply because it's historical, right? That is the foundation, because if it's not historical, then it doesn't mean anything. But this is history with purpose. This is history that we can look back at this, right, and say, okay, what is God trying to teach us through these things, right? History is not just recorded for...
Just for the sake of recording.
Yeah, because otherwise there'd be a lot of boring history out there, right? George Washington changed his socks on... but, crossing the Delaware, right? Refusing the kingship. That sort of stuff. That's history with purpose, right? So, all right, very good. Go have cookies somewhere else.